You've probably seen these fire danger signs along the roadside, but how do they decide whether a day is moderate, extreme, or catastrophic fire danger? It's not just based on a vibe check from the fire chief. The fire danger dial is actually based on a whole lot of maths and science. Fuel and weather information are put into a model that calculates how hard a fire will be to put out. And by fuel, I mean plants. In Australia, the previous version of the model used to only differentiate between trees and grass. But the latest version that came out in 2022 has 8 different models to differentiate between 8 different landscapes. That's grassland, savanna, spinifex, buttongrass, forest, mallee heath, shrubland, and pine. The model calculates how quickly the fuel is going to catch fire and how quickly the fire is going to spread. There are 4 main factors that influence this. The first is drought factor. When did it last rain and how dry is the fuel? If it rained heavily 3 days ago, you're probably not going to see a catastrophic fire danger day. But if it hasn't rained for the past 3 weeks, then the fuel is probably very dry and therefore will likely catch fire easily. Next is temperature. This is self-explanatory. If the air is hot, then the fuel will dry and catch fire quicker. The third is relative humidity. Basically, how dry is the air? If the air is really humid, then it will be harder for a fire to catch and burn. But if the air is really dry, then the vegetation will dry out faster and therefore burn a lot quicker. Finally, wind. The direction of the fire and how fast a fire spreads is largely dictated by the wind. Fun fact, well, it's actually quite a terrifying fact, but the catastrophic fire danger rating was only introduced after the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria in 2009, because that fire was so intense and so difficult to extinguish that they needed a whole new rating to describe it. When a fire becomes so intense, it can create its own storm cloud made of ash and dust, and you can't fly water bomber helicopters over it. Additionally, these storm clouds, called pyrocumulus clouds, can suck up embers high into the sky where the wind can blow them tens of kilometers away, starting new fires. These are called spot fires. During Black Saturday, burning pieces of bark were being launched over mountains and starting new fires 40 kilometers away from the main fire. These features made that fire catastrophic. So if you see tech bros on X talking about inventing firefighting drones, or you can tell them that that would be about as effective as shooting a BB gun at Godzilla. And yes, rising temperatures due to burning of fossil fuels are to blame for increased fire weather days, increased fire extent, and fire intensity. Some people argue that climate change isn't to blame for fires because things like arson or faulty power lines that ignite fires aren't affected by climate change. But scientists have found that in California, the ignition of fires has stayed largely constant for the past few decades, but the area burned by the fires has increased. And that is because the fires are more intense from climate change. You may have noticed the worst fire weather day is usually just before the cool change arrives and at the end of a heat wave. In the southern half of Australia, the weather patterns usually go something like this: high, front, low, high, front, low. When there is a big high pressure system sitting above you in summer, that's when you will likely have very hot days and either very little wind or wind coming from the north. As the front passes over, the wind picks up, which helps spread the fires. And importantly, the wind also changes direction from northerlies to southerlies. And this can be disastrous for fires. Imagine you have a fire being blown from a northerly wind, and it might look like this. Then quite rapidly, the wind changes to a southwesterly. Now the front of the fire suddenly becomes a lot bigger, and towns that thought they were out of danger are in the firing line again. This is what happened during the Black Saturday fires in 2009. The fire changed direction quite rapidly, and towns like King Lake were suddenly surrounded by the fire. So now you know the basics of fire weather. Remember, if it's a catastrophic fire day in your area, the best thing to do is evacuate early.